This is now, let's see, should show up over here now. Just waiting and making sure you guys can see this. Let's see what's on my other screen. Let's mute that one. There we go. Okay, so I think we are live. Is that one working now? Just checking. Okay, awesome. Go ahead and start. So if you're joining me, I had a little link change, so hopefully you got to the right site. And if you're here, welcome. I'm Erin Earnshaw, and I teach 8th grade language arts and history in California. And I'll be doing a presentation on podcasting, but it's really, the question that was asked of us was, what are the, what's something you could present in 15 minutes that was actually what makes a difference in your teaching in your classroom? And for me, it's being present and taking advantage of the opportunities that I see around me, and then trying new things and not being afraid to try new things, knowing that that's kind of the spice of education, is getting to test out your ideas in your experiment of your classroom. So it's still going. So if you want to tweet me, I will be on there. And then there's also the questions you can ask in the comment section. I'll be looking at both of those. But I'm going to go ahead and start my screen share and just make sure my entire screen. Okay. This is so weird not being able to see myself now. Okay, so welcome, teacher friends. So for this slideshow, you should be able to get access to it. I kind of made the mother of all slideshows in that I put everything I could think of in one place. So I put links to the podcasts that some of my students actually created. And I also put in links to some of the feedback forms, the Google Docs, the audio clips of things. So it's all in here. So it seems like a really big slideshow, but I'm not going to go over every single slide. I just wanted a place for everyone to have stuff in one spot. So that should come up at a couple places. So one of the things that I noticed is that podcasting seems to be everywhere. Over the last few years, it's gotten really popular. Serial was the big one that everyone probably heard about, but you might also have been listening to This American Life for years and years, Fresh Air, the Nerdist podcast. Those are ones that I listen to a lot. And some people are thinking, well, where do I find all of these things? And come back here. No, that's going to be, I stop screen sharing. Can you see me live again? If you look in just in your phone, if you have an iPhone like me, just a little purple button, and there's your podcast, and you can look up all sorts of content. And now teachers are putting their own podcasts out there. Other education curriculum coordinators are putting things out there. So you're either interviewing people, or you are talking about one of your products or something that you're writing, or your classroom. So it could be something that a professional uses, but also I felt like it's something that it's kind of an easy medium for students to pick up as well. Let's go back. Screen share. And then I was also kind of looking at Ken Robinson and his talks about creativity, and those two things kind of came together in podcasting, thinking this seems to be the new kind of way that people are expressing their writing. So all the things you can think of that you can do with writing, you can basically do with audio recording. So my presentation today, I'm going to go just do an overview of some of the things that you might want to use it for, to give you some ideas, because I know a lot of you will be from different backgrounds and different content areas and ages. And then I'll talk about the lesson that I chose to tackle this year, and what some of the things that I learned about and the problems that I had with it, and what I would do differently. And then, of course, the logistics of where do you start? Say you're sold, I want to start this. What do I buy? What do I need to buy? Do I need to buy anything? All of those things will come kind of towards the end. So for podcasting on the left, we have writing. I mean, we do all of this stuff in our classrooms, whatever content area you are, you might have different things that you would have a student write about. And a lot of the podcasts that have become popular are kind of journalism-based storytelling podcasts, but you can really use it for anything that you want to have them maybe reading. You could have them read aloud, practice fluency, narration over the top of video. They can then, of course, edit it, which is the brilliant thing about podcasting, is that the student gets to revise and edit what they're doing to their liking, which sometimes they fall down the rabbit hole like adults would on editing and revising and getting it just perfect. But that's also one of the standards for Common Core, is that revision and editing. So it helped for my students get a little more involved in that. They can add music and add audio layers and voiceovers. They can interview other people on it. So it can kind of take on a life of its own once you start getting into this. And I started seeing, in everything that I was doing in the classroom, I started seeing different opportunities for how I might use something. And that's really what is making the difference in my teaching, is that anything that gets me inspired and thinking outside the box and, oh, what could I try with that? And, oh, I wonder if that would work. That's what keeps it interesting for me and for my students, because then I have that passion still in the classroom, which I think is so important, that students deserve. They deserve to have a teacher that really wants to be there, cares to be there, and is inspired by what they're doing and wants to see what the students are able to do with this information. And I'm curious and interested in what they will bring to the table. And it also adds that novelty. I chose to do my project starting in February, March. So they had already had me for a few months, and something a little different was needed. So this was a good time period for me to try tackling a big project like this. So this is what it actually looks like. This is my classroom on a podcasting day, where we have groups of students sitting around doing all different things. And that's one of the things I had to get used to, was this is going to be chaotic at times, and there will be students along different areas of the process. Some of them are starting to finish and starting to edit. Other ones are re-recording. You'll see the little dongle here where you'll have multiple people listening to the podcast together and talking about it. I will be hovering over different groups, providing support where needed, so I can differentiate. Here's just one of the setups that you can use. And if you Google podcasting in education, you'll find all sorts of other people out there that are doing this. This is what worked for me. I borrowed a snowball mic from the 6th grade classrooms that weren't using it, because that's the brilliant thing about finding technology, is that it's not being used every single minute of the day. So go out to your other teachers at your sites and see what do they have and what's the in-between time. Then they might not be using it. Maybe you could borrow it. So I used the snowball mic, and I have a link at the end of the presentation for that. My mom helped me make these audio boxes that are just audio foam that we bought on Amazon, and a little foam or a little fabric drawer that we got at Walmart. I believe it was like $11 or something. And then we have Chromebooks at my site. So we have a WeVideo license, and there's a lot of different audio programs you can use, but I used WeVideo just because it was something that the kids already knew how to use. So it was easy to use from there. So where do you start with a project like this? I wanted the students to have some sort of an example or model, but I've never done it before. So it's not like I could say, students last year tried this. So I started without telling them they were going to be creating a podcast. I just had them start listening to it in an alternative to reading something. It was listening to something. And I started with the Radiolab episode on limits, which this should be a link. This is a link you can go to later if you'd like to hear it. I played this to individual students on their Chromebooks. And so they had headphones and they just listened to the episode. And I had a Google Doc open and let them just kind of give feedback on, how are you noticing this is different than if you were to just read the transcript of this, or just read the actual interview. How is it different? And then we shared out things that they noticed. So they didn't know that they were going to be doing a podcast, creating one themselves. It was just kind of investigating what's out there and what are the things that they're picking up on. And some other ones that you might want to start with are anything, This American Life. Obviously, you want to screen them depending on your age group. But the limits episode was pretty interesting. And there's 3 acts on limits of the body, limits of the brain and limits of the mind. And it's tied together like that, but the three different stories are completely different stories from different time periods and different subject areas, and they really tie them together with that unifying title. And that kind of got me thinking of, maybe I can use that in my classroom somehow. I've seen people that have used, or I've heard of people that have used Serial in their high school classes. I personally wouldn't at my small middle school, but maybe the first episode or two or sections of the episode. But I found Serial to be highly addictive, and once I started listening to it, I couldn't stop. So if you show part of it to your students, chances are they're going to go online, find it, and listen to the rest of it, and it may not be appropriate for specific age groups. So then I spoke with the science teacher next about what kind of project we might want to put together, and I shared with her that, I don't really know what I want to do with this. I kind of came to her with a, hey, do you have any ideas? This is what I'm thinking. I had gone to see Ira Glass at a talk that he did. I was really inspired and excited, but where does the rubber meet the road? How am I actually going to make this work? And we started with some true backwards design. So thank you, Lisa, for giving me this idea. But she was saying, well, how do they do it in real life? And they kind of start with an idea, they start with a story, and then they build up from there and add layers of things there. So that's really where we started. So the end result, the goal was to create a 3-act episode, like some of the other podcasts that students had been listening to in class, around a common theme. And there were the 3 things that that I've been hearing from Ira Glass and Brian, I'm forgetting his last name, that they talk about. The 3 main things of an effective podcast is action, reflection, and the stakes, or that is what they call it, or a question, which is like the common theme, like limits. And then I broke it down into phases. I did not tell the students ahead of time, you're going to eventually make this giant 3-episode podcast. I just had them start in phase 1 and just said, we're going to write a story. And they didn't really know where it was going. They thought that was just it. So I felt like that was a way to keep it from being a little bit too overwhelming. At the same time, I was reading this Out on the Wire by Storytelling and Secrets of podcasters out there. So the other thing that I noticed was, if I want to have something creative, I kind of have to have some limits. Because if I just tell them, write any story you want, sometimes they get a little gun shy. So I thought we could work within the science class, and we started looking at how the students are learning about the elements, the periodic table of elements. So we used that. So in their science class, they're learning about the periodic table, and this took us about a week. They worked as individuals, and they were each assigned an element from the periodic table to research more in depth, like they had done at previous projects of previous years. So that was not new to us as teachers. And then as they started taking notes and all of that, they were taking notes on the properties, the uses, the history. And then they started doing some other pair share things, like if your element was a superpower, or superhero, what powers would they have? And things like that, to get them thinking outside the box, to push them a little bit. And in their language arts class, we had them take that element and personify it and create a story around that. So I have an example of chlorine having an open valence electron ring, doesn't ever feel full, and it's on a mission to find its forever friend. He's also a superhero, and he cleans up the streets of New York. So you kind of get that idea. So in the language arts class, we use that to do quick writes around it to get them thinking. And at first, the students were like, wait, this is science stuff. Why are we doing science in our language arts class? And in their science class, they thought, why are we doing language arts things in our science class? And we both kind of went, have you not been getting integrated projects from us all year, and yet you're still thinking that it has to be separate? So we kind of had to get them out of that a little bit as well. But I focused on mini lessons at this time period about theme and conflict and all of that. The idea behind all of this was really to get them to be doing a project that's concurrent with their learning. There's so many projects out there that are applying after they learn something. We really wanted to get something that helped them process their thinking during the learning process. So one of the phase 1 parts that I learned is that the stories that I had students write, not all of them had that show don't tell element, and it's really important for the end product that you have action in that story. Whatever story you start with, whether it's this project where they're have an element that's personified, or you just have them create a story, or there's a journalism article, whatever it is, your audience is only going to be hearing your story, and you just talk about things that happened and don't actually give them something to picture, they won't be able to visualize the audio that they're listening to. And if you hear any really good podcast, you'll hear them break it down. They'll start doing something that's action, and you can picture going down the street with that person. So the example that I gave in class was that um, there was this girl, and she was sitting in the passenger seat of her parked car and another car raced into the stall to her right. The driver obviously was in a hurry and almost took out her mirror. She looked up and made eye contact with the driver. That's the moment when, right? So those are actions where they can actually see what's happening, and that becomes the page turner, where even if it's not a great story, like nothing really even happened in that story, it is something that you want to know what happened next. So that action is really what helps drive the story. So, and then there's some other ideas that I had, that if you didn't want to do a science integrated one, it could be just a personal narrative. You could just start really small and start with just retelling a scene from a novel or a movie, and that retelling could be really getting into that action. So there's a lot of different entry points that you could use that doesn't have to be a science element story. So phase 2 was, okay, great, you have your story. Now I'm going to have you record your story with your own voice. And some of the students were really excited about that. Other ones were very nervous and scared to have their voices recorded. And they, listening to their own voices is so hard. And so I had a few groans, but I modeled some of it and just told them, hey, we can do this. Oh, and I'm so running out of time. Okay, so you get the idea. I'm going to move along a little bit. So they recorded their voices. Then they took that voice and, oh, here's some of the ideas that they had. I told them, it's okay, we're all recording our voices. And this one was like, nope, I'm going to hide in this box and record my voice this way. That way I can tune all of you guys out. So phase 3 was, now they have that audio recording, and they can now start to work with another person to put those audio recordings together. So if I'm a student, I would work with 2 other students, and we would make a 3-act podcast with a theme together. And that project took forever, and I learned a lot about that one. But there's some links that you might want to use. It was really, really hard. I started with trying to have them work together and come up with a uniting question. And a lot of my students couldn't get out of the literal idea. And I think it came from, they didn't really understand what a theme was. That stakes, that overarching question, they felt like literally needed to be someone asking a question in the beginning. So I would really go back into having them listen to more podcasts and see if they can identify what the question is, and point out that the podcasters don't actually say, this is the question that we are going to answer by the end of this podcast, right? It's just something that's kind of hanging in the air. And that was difficult for me to make clear for students. So here's some of the things that they came up with, though, even with that difficulty. Some of them said, okay, me and my 2 other students, we're going to have a podcast where the 3 episodes go together and they answer the question, what does happen if you don't take care of yourself? So if this element isn't present in your body, this is what could happen. And they're going to look at that in 3 different ways for 3 different elements of someone's body. Another one might be, they personified that each of the elements are like friends, and they're all different, but they still can be friends. So the big question was, at what point is friendship acceptable, and or difference is acceptable, and when is it not, and when you can still be friends with them. So there's a few different ideas. Another one was just that they felt that their stories weren't really good, and so they thought they'd just make an overarching question as, what should you not do when you're writing a story? What did they learn about writing a story that they would want to change? So that one was an interesting one. And then they layered the different stories, that those were the action, and then they talked to each other and recorded a voiceover narration that was their reflection, and then the question was kind of embedded in the whole thing. And then at that point, I started showing them different ideas about how to edit sound and how to take your story volume and just lower it, and then talk over the top of it, and then bring your story volume back up. And so playing with different editing techniques and hearing other podcasts and listening for different tricks out there. And it was chaotic for sure, but it was fun chaos. Let me just check on if there's any questions that are popping up. Oh, good. You can hear me. Yay. Okay, let me pull back. So as the students joined up with each other, they shared their ideas really freely with each other. I really liked seeing that. If one student had an idea and they noticed someone near them was struggling, they would go over to that other group and say, "Hey, did you try this? We just learned this." They were really excited to share the things that they were learning along the way. And I love that a lot of them just decided, we're just going to sit on the floor because then we don't have to look at everybody. Their own little space. So even if you don't have an audio booth, this is totally doable in your classroom. And what I just kept reminding the students over and over again was the background noise is ambiance. It does not have to be perfect. There will be other people's noises behind you. As long as you can hear your voice clearly enough, that's fine. We're not here to perfect it. We're here to try something new, play around with it. So then I have some feedback. I just have some audio clips of what I talked to students about. Just leave those in there if anybody wants to see them. And then some other links for things that I showed alongside, because as I said, we were trying to do a project that was concurrent with their learning. So the same thing with podcasting, kind of learning how to do it while they're doing it. So they listened to Radio Diaries episode, and we took notes on that and then talked about what are some things that you learned about that you could apply right now in the next 15 minutes in your podcast groups. And they would kind of share out those ideas. So it became a really exciting time period of learning because they were kind of like me in that when I go out into the world, I'm thinking as a teacher. I have my teacher hat on pretty much all the time, thinking, "Ooh, what if I do this?" And the students were thinking when they were listening to podcasts at that point, since they had an immediate place to try it out, they were going, "Ooh, let's try that. Let's see. Ooh, what if we tried this?" They started getting that kind of excitement sort of ideas across that was really fun to be a part of. Here's 2 podcasts from students, and I've tried this before, and the audio doesn't actually come through my screen through here, so you'll have to just look at the video or the slideshow, and you can click through this. But I have two different ones, and I really love the second one. That there was a student who felt like she just didn't really have creativity as much as she did when she was younger, and she noticed that her younger brother was really creative. And I said, "Well, let's get him on your podcast then. Let's interview him. Let's get his voice in your podcast." So she has an interview with her little brother where it shows that's that action, right? It shows, not tells, that her idea of creativity, and then when she gives the same idea to her little brother, he just goes off on all these different tangents, and she was able to pull that into the podcast. And then I have lots of logistical things with this. And feel free to email me with questions. I'm kind of looking at the time going, oh my gosh, 15 minutes is so not enough time. So let me just check back. Were there any other questions, or should I just continue on with, I think I'll just continue on with logistics, because that's probably where people were getting their kind of nitty-gritty questions. So I had everybody save all of their stuff to their Google Drive and then share it with me that way. Then I could copy it if I needed to or move it around. They weren't just sending me a link through WeVideo, but they were actually saving a file to their drive that we could actually do things with. For feedback at the end, I had them, I created in Google Classroom a document for each group. So I had the names of the students at each group, and then another page that had all the podcasts available that all the students had done across I have 2 block class periods. And then what I did in one class period, block 1, those students, I gave them the other students, I assigned them the other students from block 2 to listen to their podcasts on their Chromebooks, not presented to the whole class because that'd be too many at once. Do you imagine 60, or would that be about 20, 30 podcasts all together? That's too many, because it ended up being about 10 minutes long each one. So that's too many. So I assigned one student would get 3 podcasts that they'd have to listen to from the other class period. Since they had already been idea sharing within their own class, I thought it would be good to expose them to the other class. And everyone got about 3 different groups to listen to, and then they went to a Google Doc by that group. Say I was assigned this group, say I'm in block 1, then I was assigned block 2's list here. And all I did was cut up a piece of paper and hand them out physically, because I felt that was probably the easiest way to get the names out to the different students. And then they opened the document and were able to, and here's an opening on one of the documents. There's my name as the reviewer, and I just put 2 boxes. One thing that you noticed that worked, and what are some suggestions for next steps? And then each of them, they were listening to them with headphones, because that's really what podcasting is supposed to be, is you're listening to it by yourself somewhere. You're doing dishes, you're driving your car, you're doing whatever, but it's a one listener to the podcast. So I had them listen and critique them individually. But the nice thing about having it in Google Classroom is that when they were finished with their assigned feedback form, they could access anybody's. They could listen to anyone's podcast that they wanted, whether it was in their class or somebody else's class. And they didn't have to give feedback on everybody's, but they could listen to the ones if they had a friend in class they wanted to hear about, or someone from another class. So it was an open idea sharing for that. So that worked out really well. For publishing, I chose for this project not to publish. One of the things that I noticed for my podcast is by the time we were done, this took about 2 months, I would say, by the time I really got from the very beginning of having them listen to podcasts to actually getting the feedback together. And I really need to find a way to shorten that. This was my first project, so I just kind of let things go. And when they couldn't get things done, it was like, okay, we'll just give you an extra day because I'm just sort of figuring this out. But by the end of it, they really weren't, they needed something else. So I chose to shut off this last piece here. But the easiest way to just do it is just to save to drive and share it that way. You can also paste all the links together on one Google document, and then all the students can listen that way, or other colleagues in your schools, or etc. The other thing that's cool about podcasting is that if the students only use their first name, they can share it. You can share it online without having to have like photo release forms. But there's also all these other options that I've found. A lot of people use SoundCloud and Podbean. You do have to pay for those, though. I have not found a free, other than Google Drive and sharing it, a free way to publish it. You can actually even get it onto iTunes, but you have to first get it on a platform that you pay for, like a monthly fee, and then you can share that link onto iTunes. I'm not there yet myself, but that would be my next step for next year. This is one, just as I was thinking of the last phase, to add a phase 4 possibly, and then going and adding a visual. And this was what Ira Glass did with the New Yorker cover. There was a podcast episode that they did, and an artist got a hold of it, and they created an animated cover of the New Yorker with the podcast in the background. So that would be a cool next step for somebody. And I do have a couple of examples of some students trying that. And my example, the big thing here, and I'm just kind of shortening it for time, but the big thing here was that the beginning of this animation is very literal. They're literally talking about 2 people getting ready for Halloween. And then as the story goes on, the images get more figurative and more symbolic. And so I did a video of my own that shows that shift, and then had the students just choose 30 seconds of their podcast and try to do the same thing. Start with some literal images, then try to make it a little more symbolic and see what you come across. And we had a student that their story was about high school, and their images started to use prisons. So it kind of had that feel that they felt like high school was more like a prison to them. They're not in high school yet, so I didn't take offense to them. They're still in middle school in my group, right? They didn't talk about me. And then the other one was on creativity and how there's limits on creativity, and then they used images of net neutrality to try to show that that's also hindering creativity, even though net neutrality was nowhere in their podcast. It added that symbolic layer and tone to it. So that was another fun thing to play around with. So I ended the whole thing with students about, this is what people are doing with the advent of digital media, is people are taking something, a medium that seems like it's done, a book, a journal article, a newspaper article, an interview, and they're adding it, they're putting it through all these digital media filters and going to the next level and the next level. And then I just showed them, here's a radio drama where they created a musical out of one of the podcasts, and then just some other things that I'm not sure where they fit in the classroom, but they were really, they fit in here somewhere with crazy digital storytelling in the future of media. So just feel like that was a good place to end it, in a kind of not sure where else we're going to take this, but look at the possibilities. What are they going to think of next? And then I have some money stuff for me. I spent by the end of the year, $700 on this project, but that's because most of this was WeVideo that we bought from the beginning of the year through PTA. And so for me, I borrowed the $200 mics. I myself only spent about $150, and I'll be able to reuse all of that. That's just a startup cost. Next year it won't cost very much, just the WeVideo licenses, which usually PTA is good about supporting. You can also get the free version of WeVideo. You don't have to get the full licenses. And then lots of other ideas with the audio booth and the fabric. I was able to get a small discount on the acoustic panels if you want to just get those. So I just kind of left these ideas out here. I would definitely recommend the headphone splitter though, so that one student's computer can be listened to by 5 other students at the same time. Those are really cheap, $8. If you have further questions, I know that was a lot of information, very ambitious to try to put all of that in one show, and my time is up. But if you want to email me, this is still on the tip of my tongue. I'm very excited about it still, so I'm excited to answer any questions you have, or if you want to do a call on the phone or something, and if you have questions or ideas or things that you want to share with me, that maybe you have some other things that you do with podcasting that you find that I could maybe use. I'm into idea sharing, so feel free to send things along. So is there any other things that I noticed on questions? Oh, look at those. Yes, I did share it at the beginning, and I will share it again with the slideshow, because like I said, it's a giant slideshow and there's a lot in there. Can't go over it all today, but you can look at it later. So let me put that in here. There's that. And I think that is it. So if you have any other questions, I'll stay on the link for a while. But just thank you for coming out. This is my first ever one of these. So hopefully you learned something new and it worked out. And it sounds like everybody was able to hear me. So that was my biggest concern, and that's done. So yeah, stay trying new things, risk taking, being vulnerable in front of students, be present, keep your teacher hat on, and yeah, enjoy. Keep on teaching. Bye, everybody. Thanks.